Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. One of the major questions in human life is where to draw the line between what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. This question applies to both individuals and to societies as a whole. It can be relevant for a group as small as a couple or a nuclear family, or as large as an entire nation or even a group of nations. It is commonly applied to very large groups that supersede the artificial boundaries of a nation, such as a religion which may encompass billions of people. It is one of the fundamental questions of civilization. How are we to behave, both privately and publicly? This question has been around since the earliest records of history, but there is no doubt that it long predates the invention of writing in any form. There is no strong reason not to believe that our ancestors living in the caves had to deal with issues like these. Those societies, as primitive as we may believe them to have been, were really no different from our own in that they had to have some means of keeping everything together and not descending into anarchy. It was for this reason that every society, from the most primitive to the most modern, has to have rules. There is, of course, no natural formula for any of this. There is nothing like the law of gravity or whatever laws there are that guide biology or chemistry. Mathematics is filled with rules that emerge from analysis of the somewhat natural implications of examining numbers and the ways that they relate to each other and to the world, real or imaginary. Generally speaking, nobody questions these rules because doing so would appear to defy some sort of fundamental logic or to go against what seems to be reality. Scientific rules, for the most part, are the scientific equivalent of being God-given. They just are. But when it comes to social rules, there are no such absolute standards. They may seem to be made up as they go along. If we were to examine the social customs and laws of 17th century England, we would probably be shocked by what we saw. We might find such things as mandatory witch burning or employer ownership of child laborers, to say nothing of rules concerning duels and blasphemy. If we went back further in time or more remote from our familiar surroundings in geography, things would probably get even stranger. Societal rules are inherently man-made and thus artificial. We prefer not thinking of them as such, but that doesn't make them any more genuine. They are what we have come up with to run a functional society. The debates on these laws in any given society are invariably endless. Some will always favor more restrictive laws in certain situations, while others will always wish to get rid of the restrictions. The arguments for one way or the other are usually framed in terms of moral principles, such as good and evil or right and wrong. These arguments tend to be quite passionate, since they generally involve things that are both readily understandable and very relevant to life. Although societal rules are man-made, we almost automatically imagine them to be somewhat divine or guided by something greater than the whims of the human personality. One of the earliest and certainly most fundamental law codes of the world is the Bible. The Torah specifically is loaded with these laws. While many of the laws concern obscure subjects such as animal sacrifices or ritual purity, there are plenty of others that are basic do's and don'ts of biblical society. They allow us to form a picture of what that biblical society looked like. From what was permitted and what was forbidden, we gain an understanding of the goals and the aspirations of the society. It is like studying somebody's face and gleaning an idea of what that person is actually like. This week's Parsha is called Ki Teitzei, a two-word phrase that means when you go out. The phrase has very little to do with the contents of the Parsha, which to some degree reads like a snapshot of biblical society. The phrase introduces the first of many laws discussed in this rather long Parsha. It concerns the rules about when a woman is taken captive in a war, how she is to be treated both sexually and maritally. While this may seem to us to be a little barbaric, it was very relevant in biblical times, and the laws that are given show that even in a topic as unsavory as this, there were things which were permitted and things which were forbidden. From there, the Parsha takes us on a whirlwind tour of the rules of biblical society. There are two other Parshas in the Torah that have similar content. One is in the book of Exodus and the other in Leviticus. They all consist of seemingly random lists of rules and customs, and it is not unusual to find what is written in one repeated or varied in another. Our Parsha, Ki Teitzei, is about as random as it gets as far as finding a cohesive theme or structure. It is just one law after another, though there are times when the Parsha groups several laws of a common concern together. It gets into laws of inheritance and then rules about dealing with a rebellious son. There are scattered rules about returning lost articles and helping out someone who is in a tight situation. The laws can be agricultural in nature, or they can relate to marriage and divorce. There is a long section dealing with cases of rape and marital infidelity. There are the inevitable rules about certain forbidden marriages, though they differ considerably from earlier examples of this. Here they concern marriages with people from different nations and with those who have some sort of social stigma or a physical problem that prevents the fathering of a child. There are extremely obscure laws, such as the requirement to shoo away a mother bird before taking the eggs from its nest, or wearing a garment made of a combination of wool and linen. These are about as strange as things get in Torah laws, but they make up an essential part of this widely varied parsha. And then there are very sensible, reasonable rules, such as a prohibition on kidnapping and paying wages to a worker on time. The parsha closes with the section dealing with the obligation to marry the childless widow of one's brother, to preserve the name of the deceased brother alive through a child born from this unexpected union. At the very end is a law about remembering what the ancient tribe of Amalek did to the Israelites when they left Egypt during the Exodus. This everlasting law sustains a kind of biblical blood feud that for some reason was essential to Israelite identity. While there's no cohesive theme to all of this, when read together as a unit, they do paint a rather descriptive picture of biblical society. It had unquestionable ethical concerns. It had very rigorous rules about sexual relations and the integrity of marriage. It dealt with all aspects of life that were relevant at the time and rarely considered something to be trivial or not worth thinking about regulating. It may not have conformed to what is considered moral today, but it certainly conformed to a very strict moral code. If that included cutting off the hand of an assailant, even if they were somewhat justified in attacking somebody else, so be it. There was a society that had to be maintained at all costs, and these rules and these laws were the glue that held it together. Among these many laws is one that has managed to make it to modern times almost unchanged. It is one of those relatively rare examples of biblical prohibitions that almost every society throughout history has somehow decided is worth keeping, no matter how outdated it may have seemed. Without further ado, here are the relevant verses. Quote, "There shall not be a female prostitute among the Israelite girls, and there shall not be a male prostitute among the Israelite males. You shall not bring the fee of a harlot or the price of a dog to the house of Hashem your God, for the fulfillment of any vow, for both of them are abhorred by Hashem your God." There it is, the prohibition against prostitution. It includes both female and male prostitutes. The prohibition is extended to forbid the money a prostitute receives to be used as payment for some offering that was vowed to the house of God. This extension is fairly extreme as far as general prohibitions about prostitution are concerned. Most people would say that it's one thing to forbid the basic practice, but something altogether different to extend that prohibition to include tainting the money paid to a prostitute for use in the temple. But the Torah does precisely that. The money is considered unholy and unworthy of associating with a holy cause. There is some debate about whether the word used for prostitute, kadesh for a male and kadesha for a female, truly means what we consider today to be prostitutes. The word, ironically, is related to the very common biblical word for holiness. Some suggest that these prostitutes were associated with a religious shrine. In other words, they were temple prostitutes. But this is not borne out by traditional readings of the text. There's a completely different word used to describe the prostitute whose money was deemed taboo for the temple. That word is zona, the modern Hebrew term for a prostitute. But again, they seem to be interchangeable terms, and what is meant is nothing other than the world's oldest vice. This is a reflection on what biblical society was really after. Such a thing was always around. The Bible recognized that there was no stopping it. but it was prohibited for Israelite males and females. If the basic practice could not be uprooted altogether from society, at least those who were members of this select group, called Israelites, should not be those who actively promote it. That is the least that can be expected from a society with the goal of basic morality. Sexual matters are human matters. They are a function of biological needs and psychological struggles. But even something as basic as this has to be kept in check and regulated. We are not animals. The least we can demand of ourselves is that we behave as human beings. That this doesn't always work out as planned is a given. That violations of it run rampant through a society is also to be expected. But we can still have standards and goals. Prostitution is one of those things that has found a home in virtually every society that existed. The reasons for this are both fascinating and disturbing. In the modern Western world, there is a strong undercurrent to uproot this taboo altogether. Why should something so basic, which really does no harm to anyone, be prohibited? The only answer to this question, assuming it to be a valid question to begin with, is that a line has to be drawn somewhere in social behavior. Prostitution, according to the Torah, falls on the wrong side of that line. It is something which is the very opposite of holiness. Perhaps this is the reason why prostitutes were called by a word which is related to the word for holiness. They represented its mirror image, the epitome of unholiness that the Bible wished to uproot from its followers. Just as holy things are off limits for those who aren't prepared to respect them, so also some modes of behavior are off limits for a society intent on bringing God into their life. Shabbat Shalom.